Welcome to the Whitney Plantation Guided Tour, where you'll experience Louisiana's first plantation museum dedicated solely to the lives of enslaved people. Enslaved West Africans established this plantation and generated wealth for its owners through their work. They cut down trees in a thicket of palmetto and cypress to make way for plantation land. They built levees to manage the flow of the Mississippi River. They harvested rice, indigo, and sugarcane. They plowed fields, drove mule carts, raised and cared for livestock, and farmed food crops. Enslaved people raised the plantation's owners' children in the house they built, as well as doing the laundry, cooking, and cleaning, all. So what exactly is the Whitney? The Whitney Plantation was only one of hundreds along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Thousands of enslaved Africans were forced to work here, making it one of the country's wealthiest neighborhoods. This region of Louisiana is known as the German Coast since the majority of the plantation owners in this area were white. The Whitney Plantation was owned by only one family, the Hydels, for 110 years. During this time, they enslaved around 350 people. In 1834, this plantation saw about 114 enslaved. The majority of the buildings you'll see are original to the estate. However, some structures have been relocated from other areas to assist the depiction and the tale of the enslaved people. The Haydell family lived in the big house from 1790 to 1867. In 1790, enslaved Africans constructed this house for the plantation's owner, John Jacques Haydell Sr. John Jacques was the son of the plantation's founder. The big house also functioned as the plantation's courthouse. It was also where enslaved domestics would be on call for their owners around the clock, sometimes sleeping on pallets. Enslaved domestics would have been in, so it goes without saying that they The kitchen has been on site since 1790. The existing building was constructed in the mid-1800s. On big estates in the South, isolated kitchens were typical, meant to keep cooking odors, heat, and smoke away from their owners' living quarters. For similar reasons, enslaved individuals would cook for themselves over little outdoor fires. It was usually black hands in the pot, cooking up African cuisine like gumbo, jambalaya, crawfish, etouffee, and couscous. All of these dishes originated from Africa, but were later imported and transformed. The origins of Creole food would be birthed in plantation kitchens like the one you see here. Black-eyed peas, okra, yams, and watermelon originated in Africa and were widely grown in Louisiana. Enslaved cooks prepared hog, turkey, beef, chicken, turtle, freshwater drum, and pigeons from their masters' tables. There are still pigeonholes in the kitchen loft to your. Here you have the blacksmith shop where an enslaved man named Robin worked as a blacksmith on the plantation owned by John Jacques Haydell in the 1820s. Plantation blacksmiths created equipment and supplies for the plantation workers. Enslaved domestic workers and tradesmen, such as Robin, might occasionally get financial gratuities for their labor. A plantation's master had the legal authority to offer freedom to an enslaved individual, and an enslaved person may occasionally purchase his or her freedom. That did not happen often. However, when it did, it generally was because an enslaved person possessed a valuable ability. Coopers are similar to blacksmiths and carpenters. They may also earn tips and work extra hours, allowing someone who saved that money to someday buy their freedom. They were not required to work on the plantation full-time, and they were frequently rented out from plantation to plantation, all the way to New Orleans. Enslaved people constructed this house from cypress trees collected on the estate. Whitney Plantation had 22 slave cabins, 2 for the domestics near the big house, and 20 more in 2 rows facing one another. Today, the plantation has 7 slave houses. 2 are original. The others come from a plantation in Terrebonne Parish, roughly 50 miles south of here. The walls and ceiling have little insulation, so it was freezing in the winter and hot in the summer. The front room functioned as a kitchen, eating area, living room, and bedroom. Enslaved workers shared beds or occasionally slept on pallets on the floor. Enslaved people shared this room with other family members in the limited time they had outside of labor hours if their family remained intact. However, many enslaved people lost their children, spouses, siblings, and parents to death or to slave traders. Early in the morning, before dawn, the slave driver went around knocking on doors. They would ring a bell or blow on a horn and knock on the door saying, "Wake up, it's time to go to work." The enslaved individuals, known as field hands, typically labored from can't see to can't see. This implies from sunrise to sunset. This structure was built in 1868 after slavery had been abolished. It was imported from Gonzales, Louisiana, and is not commonly found on plantations. However, it is similar to the slave pens used by auction houses to confine people before being sold to the highest bidder. The slave trade, like any other industry, followed the laws of supply and demand. Louisiana was consuming individuals at a rapid rate. There was a high death rate, thus there is a higher demand for individuals. To meet demand, slave dealers in the Upper South would gather a coffle of enslaved individuals and carry them to the Lower South by boat or foot. That trader bears the cost of their travel, so they paid for food, lodging along the trip, and medical care. And in many cases, they purchased insurance coverage issued by major insurers. Then they sell them in the Lower South at a far higher price. Auctions were held in both New Orleans and in the surrounding countryside. The most crucial thing to remember here is that these people were treated as animals and treated as such. With price tags around each of their necks, traders would yell out each person's most marketable characteristics in the hopes of eliciting larger bids. Women and children generally sold for less than males because men performed the majority of the labor on the Lower South estates. Men with special skills might command hefty prices. For example, in 1852, Marie Haydell, the owner of this plantation, spent about $1,500 for a man whose talent was that he was a cooper, which implies that he was a barrel maker, which would have made his price quite high. However, prospective purchasers considered more than just a skill. For example, if an enslaved person had a reputation for fleeing, he or she would be regarded as less attractive and would be sold for less. Indeed, enslaved persons could actively influence a buyer's selection on auction day. If someone is buying and has a negative reputation among enslaved people as a brutal master or something of the sort, enslaved persons might adjust their appearance and body language to make themselves less appealing. The sugar factory operated 24 hours a day from October to December. Enslaved people worked shifts around the clock. After dark, they labored by candlelight. There were 3 enslaved sugar makers on the plantation, and a whole staff of roughly 70 individuals were in charge of cutting, transporting, grinding, boiling, and refining sugarcane. The process is determined by the crop's specific requirements. Sugar must be processed rapidly since once chopped, it begins to decay. The procedure begins with the field laborers cutting the cane. The sugarcane fields and the sugar mill were the most dangerous areas on the property. In the sugar plantations, people had to be content and contend with several types of wildlife. Field workers would cut the stalks and load them into wagons. Cart drivers delivered the chopped cane to the mill, while another team fed the cane stalks through grinders. In 1822, the plantation purchased a steam engine from England to replace the mules that powered the grinders. The grinding operation removed juice from the stalks. Employees poured the juice into kettles. The kettle team carefully supervised the operation, ladling the boiling hot cane juice into the next kettle to be boiled and reduced again. This transfer occurred 4 times until the liquid reached a striking point, the point at which the sugar begins to crystallize. Workers then transformed the reduced cane juice into cooling pans with holes on the bottom to capture any molasses that had dripped out. Molasses was a profitable product, prized for both food and rum manufacturing. Finally, the crystallized raw sugar was sent to the refinery to be processed into white sugar. So they produced raw sugar and molasses on the plantation. Both of these items would be packed into hogshead barrels made by on-site enslaved coopers and exported all over the world. Sugarcane is a seasonal crop. However, enslaved people labored year-round. The Haydale Plantation, later known as the Whitney Plantation, was also a rice plantation. So there were 2 harvest seasons, and sugar and rice worked well together to keep laborers occupied all year long. The sugarcane business was both profitable and risky. These planters needed workers to fill out the ranks every year, which is why they're constantly looking to buy additional people, because these sugar plantations were lethal. The Gwendolyn Mitlow Hall Memorial commemorates the most significant research project to chronicle the ancestry of enslaved people in Louisiana. Gwendolyn Mitlow Hall is an American historian that spent 15 years collecting a searchable database that includes not only the names of enslaved persons, but also their countries of origin, locations, familial links, slave owners' prices, emancipation records, and other important information. The database spans the years 1719 to 1820 and has almost 104,000 distinct entries. Dr. Hall's study turned out details buried in courthouses, libraries, government archives, institutions, and special collections. The names in this database are etched on the granite walls. Despite Dr. Hall's extensive study, the names engraved in stone here reflect only a fraction of the enslaved persons in Louisiana over the centuries she studied. The rest are lost to history. Thanks for watching.